The Virginia Chamber Orchestra, directed by musical director Luis Haza, is proud to present music from the Age of Enlightenment. Brought to you by the ExxonMobil Foundation.
Hello everybody, I'm Robert Aubrey Davis. I'm with Public Television and Public Radio in the greater Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I host an arts discussion program, Emmy Award-winning, called Around Town, and I host a national early music program broadcast in over 150 radio stations called Millennium of Music. But we're here to talk about a little different time in the world of music, music from the Age of Enlightenment. And I have the pleasure of being joined by two specialists in the field, Robert Webb, professor of music at Northern Virginia Community College in Annandale, and Robert Petrilla, who's professor of music at Northern Virginia Community College in Alexandria. They're the Bobs, so I'll try to use first and last names as we go along. And Bob, let's talk a little bit about the program we're about to hear. And I mean, it's very homogeneous. It seems to fit together very beautifully, certainly.
It sure does. And just recently, the Virginia Chamber Orchestra gave a performance, a live performance for this taping at the Annandale campus. And they performed 3 works on that program. There was the Marriage of Figaro Overture, and then that was followed by Haydn's Symphony 100, the Military Symphony. And then at the end of the program, Mozart's Symphony Number 40 in G minor. And it was a wonderful concert.
Yeah, it sounds like the perfect kind of a concert. A lot of people sort of pull together the idea, Bob Petrilla, that this is music of the, called in classical music, this is the music that's called the classical era. In literature and thought, it's also called the Age of Enlightenment. An awful lot is going on in the middle of all of these movements and ideas, isn't there?
Yes, there is. The classical period, roughly 1750, the death of Bach, to 1825, partially encompasses that area that we generally refer to as the Age of Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, we have different sorts of concepts going on with this as well. I mean, we have the Age of Enlightenment. There is a literary movement. There's a philosophical movement. There's issues of discovery that are happening as well. Do you find this in the music, either one of you?
That's correct. Well, there were philosophers in France. There was Rousseau and Voltaire, and in England there was John Locke, and they advocated a philosophy of reason and tolerance, where they wanted to raise the middle class standards, and they were pretty much against the traditions of the aristocracy, the privileged class. And of course this led to the writings of Thomas Jefferson and our Declaration of Independence, and also affected composers down the road in the way they made their living by putting on public concerts.
Well, this is a revolution, if you think about
exactly,
it. I mean, we go from the idea of people of nobility funding concerts, or the church funding concerts, is something very different, don't we?
Where the composer actually puts on their own academy and presents their works, sells tickets, and the middle class is now able to come and hear these wonderful concerts instead of having to be, part of that aristocracy.
And the most expensive then, as now, art form was and is opera. And I mean, here we're going to actually begin with a rather remarkable story that was much controversy then, because there was all sorts of great sex in it, obviously.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The Marriage of Figaro.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. This play was even highly controversial, the Beaumarchais original.
Indeed. Mozart had seen the play by Beaumarchais, and immediately went to his librettist, Lorenzo da Ponte, who was quite a character in his own right, and asked if he could possibly write a comic opera from this play. The problem, however, was this was, as you said, quite a controversial play.
Oh, those French.
Very biting, making fun of the aristocracy, their privileges, their decadence, this sort of thing. In fact, the Emperor the Emperor Napoleon made a comment that the revolution started with the plays of Beaumarchais. And this is probably quite true. Franz Joseph, the Emperor of Austria, actually banned the play from performance in Austria and tried to stop the production of this opera altogether.
So they had to go to a little bit different town to get this thing mounted, didn't they?
Absolutely.
They wound up, I think, in Prague for the opening.
That's right. Initially, the opera was presented in Vienna and to not great success, and then it was presented in Prague to great success, and the tunes were so popular that everybody was singing them. You could hear them in the beer gardens. In fact, there's a story of a harpist who would not have anybody pay attention to him unless he played tunes from the Marriage of Figaro. And of course, then that led to another commission of his next great opera, Don Giovanni, where he actually quotes some tunes in the final act at the banquet scene from the Marriage of Figaro.
I mean, we actually have arrangements all throughout the Enlightenment and early Romantic era of tunes for everything. I mean, there's wind ensemble arrangements,
Absolutely.
there's flute ensemble arrangements, because this material was so, guitar arrangements, this was the great hit of the day. This was the rock and roll of its day. It was so tremendously popular.
Exactly.
So we have something, and of course, it's interesting because Prague is the city that doubled for Vienna in the film Amadeus, because it looks the most like Vienna used to look,
Right.
which is very good. So we have this opening. It's not very successful, but De Ponte himself, as you said, is a character. I believe he winds up on our shores.
Yes, he does.
He winds up here in New York, doesn't he?
New York, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, he had a military school, and someone told me once that he actually wound up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, with a grocery store. So,
All right, now here we have the idea. Now, of course, Mozart was famous for getting the opera done the last gasping second, but not necessarily getting the overture done at the last gasping second. Well, what was an overture supposed to do for an opera? Either Bob. What was it supposed to do, and what did it wind up doing?
well, the opera was supposed to introduce basically what was going to happen, set up the mood, so to speak, and I think Mozart was very successful with this particular overture in setting up the comic scenes that are going to be unveiled on stage during the course of the opera itself.
And so here we have just kind of set up exactly what we're looking at. We're in Vienna, we're in Prague. Where's the orchestra itself? What does the stage look like? And are people calmly sitting on their gloves and being extremely quiet? Give us a picture of what this is.
Well, I think the opera scene was quite different than it is today. I'm not exactly sure that the Viennese were quite as enthusiastic as, say, the Italians, who sometimes would cheer, throw things, spit into the lower seats, etc. But they certainly were very enthusiastic about the performances that took place in the opera.
Well, this is going to be a great performance of the Virginia Chamber Orchestra playing the overture to the Marriage of Figaro by Mozart from the stage of the Ernst Community Cultural Center in Annandale to open its program of instrumental music from the Age of Enlightenment. The overture to The Marriage of Figaro by Mozart, performance here by the Virginia Chamber Orchestra, directed by Louis Haza. And, you know, Bob Troller, before we move on, I just want to grab you real quickly. The idea of playing the overture outside of the complete opera, this is actually quite an old idea, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Many orchestral concerts would just simply begin with the opera overture itself. And concerts at that particular time were quite different from the ones we hear today. Many times they didn't perform an entire symphony, but a hodgepodge of movements from various symphonies that they squeezed all together.
Well, one of the most popular of the symphonists, Bob Webb, is a guy we're going to turn to next, a person who Mozart personally reverenced. I mean, and a good choice. I mean, if you're going to pick somebody you're going to respect a lot, I can imagine Haydn being a good choice of that, you know. Let's talk a little bit about this remarkable man's life and career. We think of him for so long in a quiet little distant backwater of the Habsburg Empire. But tell me a little bit about this.
Well, of course, Haydn's career spans the entire classical era, and he spent 30 years of his career working for the wealthy Hungarian Esterházy family. And there he had an orchestra at his disposal, he had an opera house, he had a marionette theater, he had a chapel choir, and he wrote for all of those groups. And he was isolated somewhat outside of Vienna. It's basically a day trip if you want to go out and visit from Vienna. And there he was not in the mainstream, so he became very original. And over this long lifespan, you can see how the symphony and the string quartet and the piano trio developed and evolved quite naturally by itself. And so the advantages of this patronage system was the fact that he had steady meals coming in, steady income, the orchestra at his disposal. Of course, the disadvantage was he was really a servant. He lived in the servants' quarters. His family ate and were educated with the servants' children. He went through the servants' entryways, and it wasn't until after he retired from that position he was given a yearly pension. He moved to Vienna with his own house, and there he was able to go out and then freelance, and received a yearly pension with the only requirement that he write one mass a year. And that was it.
But they were good ones.
They were wonderful.
They were
Some of his greatest works.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, you know, it's interesting to think about this, Bob Petrola, because you have a guy, all right, here you are, you know, really at that time at the end of your life, and suddenly he's discovered it would be like winning the lottery or something. I mean, first in Paris, and then this guy, Solomon, who put together a series of concerts in London, says, wait a minute, this guy's alive, he's a great composer, let's bring him over and see what happens. I mean, it was a revolution, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Solomon went to Vienna specifically to try to talk Haydn into coming into London to write a series of compositions for London, just for strictly London performance. Symphonies, there were some chamber works, other compositions as well. Probably the best well-known are the last 12 Haydn symphonies, which are known as the London Symphonies. Haydn was very successful in London. He made 2 trips to London. Unfortunately, during one of these trips, his good friend Mozart died. But he was so successful socially as well, he actually had to get larger living quarters to accommodate all the visitors that he had.
It's just such a happy story. It's one of the happy stories in music. Let's wrap up. What is a chamber orchestra? I mean, we're going to hear a chamber orchestra performance. What are some of the forces in that?
Chamber orchestra today is probably exactly the same size as the orchestras that Haydn and Mozart actually wrote for during that time period. Generally, a chamber orchestra doesn't exceed 40 members, and sort of the same makeup. The string section of violins, violas, cellos, string basses, pairs of woodwinds, oboe, flute, clarinet, bassoon, 2 French horns usually, and I think in 2 of the pieces we're hearing today, actually 2 trumpets and timpani in all 3 of these pieces.
Well, you need that drum if you're going to hear something called the military symphony. Now, of course, the fun thing about this is, my dad used to tell me when they called him Stinky Davis that people like it because they give you a nickname, you know, and they literally love to nickname Haydn's symphonies because it was just a sort of an affectionate thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. This particular symphony was given at the Hanover Square Rooms in London. And in that same hall, for instance, one symphony was dubbed the Miracle Symphony because when the audience rushed forward to applaud the orchestra, a huge chandelier fell out of the ceiling and crashed down and didn't hit anybody. It didn't kill anybody. So we'll call this one the miracle. Of course, the military symphony.
This is a flaming shed.
Yes,
We're going to get a picture here.
right.
Yeah, you know.
And of course, the military symphony features the Turkish Janissary band sound. So he introduces the bass drum, the cymbals, the triangle, to the ensemble sound to reproduce that military, scary sound, which was their purpose, to scare the enemy to death.
Absolutely. And it's very effective. We're going to hear, I think, the Allegretto, the second movement from this work. Tell me a little bit, what does Allegretto mean? And I guess it wasn't unusual just to hear movements of symphonies either at this time.
Absolutely. This particular Allegretto moves at a nice sort of a between fast and medium tempo, and it means light. And it's in an ABA structure. Basically, the main theme is a beautiful melody that Haydn was thinking about using for his trumpet concerto in the second movement. It's very close to the same melody that's used in the trumpet concerto, but not quite the same. And he combines the element of theme and variations with the ABA form. And when you get to the middle section, you'll hear the tonality change to the minor tonality. You'll hear the Turkish band coming in, and it sounds scary at that point. And then he returns back to this beautiful C major A melody again at the end. And then he ushers in the coda with a trumpet call, and then you'll again hear that Turkish band come crashing in with the scary sounds again, and then it ends very calmly. It's beautiful.
Not only beautiful, it's a masterpiece. Let's go ahead and hear the Allegretto, the second movement from Franz Joseph Haydn's Military Symphony with Louis Haza and the Virginia Chamber Orchestra. The second movement, the Allegretto, from Haydn's Military Symphony with the Virginia Chamber Orchestra, directed by Louis Haase. Now, gentlemen, our big piece, which is last, we're going to have the shortest to say about it, although you can almost, what can you possibly say about the late symphonies of Mozart? I mean, we're in the land of masterpieces. We could talk a little bit about the form. I mean, tell me a little bit about what after Haydn, Mozart did. He added movements. This is a bigger kind of a symphony, right?
Well, basically, he didn't really add movements, but he more or less brought the form to its height. And it's a 4-movement structure with a fast opening movement, a slow second movement, then the minuet and trio, and then finally the 4th movement, which is also in sonata form, which is also fast. Haydn did basically the same thing. The difference in the Haydn symphony is that there's a slow introduction at the beginning of the first movement of the Haydn. And the Haydn symphonies tend to be monothematic, meaning one theme that's varied and put into different keys. Many of the Haydn symphonies are, whereas the Mozart, you hear distinct different themes in the Mozart clear-cut sections, as if we wrote the textbook based on the Mozart 40th Symphony.
Well, and we have this issue of the sonata form as well, Bob. I mean, tell me a little bit about that.
Well, sonata allegro, the actual term itself was not known by Mozart and Haydn. It was something that was named afterwards. They may have known it as first movement form because we can expect the first movement, anything written in the classical period, be it a concerto, symphony, string quartet, the first movement will be in sonata allegro form. There are 3 basic sections to this. The first section, the exposition, where the composer presents the themes that are going to be used in this particular movement. The second section being the development section, where the composer sort of manipulates, plays around with these themes, and then finally at the end, the recapitulation, where those themes are brought back pretty much as they were originally stated, with a little coda, an ending section at the end of that movement.
With the wonderful subtext that the key of G minor really goes back to modal writing almost from the Renaissance, and all the way up to the time we come to Vaughan Williams with his Mass in G minor in the 20th century. There's something very haunting about this key.
Absolutely.
Turn to, obviously, I mean, it's one of these masterpieces about which you can almost say nothing we could possibly say can add to the beauty of what you're about to see as the Virginia Chamber Orchestra, directed by Louis Haase, performs the Mozart Symphony No. 40 in G minor.
As we discussed earlier, the Mozart 40th is in sonata allegro form, and we'd like to demonstrate some of the main themes from the exposition for you right now. First, you're going to hear the first theme. Next, you're going to hear the bridge, or the transitional theme, which takes us from the original key of G minor to the new key of B flat major. And now that we have arrived in the new contrasting key of B flat major, we're going to hear this beautiful lyrical second theme. The 4th movement of the Symphony No. 40 is also in sonata form, and we'd like to demonstrate the main themes from that exposition as well. First, you're going to hear the opening theme, which is described as a rocket theme, which came out of the Mannheim School, and it goes from low notes to high notes very rapidly, and it was such a popular theme that Beethoven stole the same pitches for his scherzo from the 5th Symphony. Next, we hear the bridge, very vigorous theme which takes us from the original key of G minor to the contrasting key of B flat major. And finally, we hear the second theme, which is a lyrical theme in B flat major.
Bye.